My name is Nora, and I am 31 years old. I own a 2-bedroom condo on the 4th floor of a quiet building in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio. I bought it 2 years ago, after spending the better part of my late 20s eating lunch at my desk, skipping every girl's trip, and pouring every dollar I didn't strictly need into a savings account I was almost afraid to look at. I am a marketing manager at a mid-size logistics company, and I am very, very good at my job. I say that not to brag, but because it matters later. Because the same skills I use to run campaigns, manage timelines, and coordinate moving parts in silence are the exact skills I used to dismantle the last great ambush my family ever tried to pull on me. This is the story of how I did it, and why I have never once regretted it. Before I get into any of it, I would love to know where you are watching from. Drop your city and the time in the comments. Honestly, it never stops being incredible to me how far these stories reach. In my family, there was always a clear hierarchy, and it was never spoken out loud because it didn't need to be. My brother, who is 4 years younger than me, was the soft center of everything. My parents built their entire emotional universe around him. He was funny and loud and charming, in that particular way that makes adults forget to hold him accountable for anything. My mother called it his spark. My father called it potential. I called it a pattern, because by the time I was old enough to name what I was watching, it had been going on for years. My brother's name is irrelevant. What matters is what he represented in our family ecosystem. He was the dream. I was the default. When we were teenagers, my parents bought him a guitar and paid for lessons twice a week because he said he wanted to be a musician. When I asked about dance lessons, my mother said we couldn't afford extras right now. When he totaled his first car at 20, my father paid to replace it without a single conversation about consequences. When I was 22 and my car needed a repair I couldn't quite cover, I got a lecture about financial planning and a loan at interest. Actual interest. From my own father. He floated through his early 20s on a cloud of everyone else's goodwill. He had a band for a while, then a podcast, then a phase where he was going to flip vintage furniture, then another phase where he was absolutely serious about getting into real estate. None of it went anywhere. None of it was expected to, because there was always a safety net below him, woven from my parents' savings, and, increasingly, from whatever I had managed to build for myself. By the time I was 28, I had learned to deflect most of the smaller asks. Can you spot him this month? He's a little short. Can you let him store some equipment at your apartment? It's just temporary. Can you talk to him about his resume? He responds better to you. I said yes to more of these than I should have, because saying no required an energy I rarely had left over after a full week of work and keeping my own life functioning. But when I turned 29 and closed on my condo, something shifted in the way my family looked at me. I saw it in my mother's eyes the first time she walked through my front door, how her gaze moved from room to room, not with admiration, but with calculation. She commented on how spacious it was. She said the second bedroom was a great size. She asked if I was ever going to actually use it. I told her it was my home office. She made a face I had seen 1,000 times. The face that meant she found my answer technically acceptable but personally disappointing. I should have paid more attention to that face. For the next year, the second bedroom became a recurring topic. My mother brought it up at holidays. My father mentioned offhand that my brother had been having a rough go of things. There were soft references to the spare room, to how I worked from home part of the week anyway, to how family helped family. I told myself I was imagining the direction it was heading. I was not imagining it. The Sunday dinners were where this family staged its negotiations. Every few weeks, I made the 25-minute drive to my parents' house, sat at the same table I had sat at since childhood, and watched my mother center every conversation on my brother's latest situation. He was there most nights too, comfortable and unhurried, eating food he hadn't bought with money he hadn't earned, talking about opportunities that were just around the corner. A few months before everything came to a head, he started bringing his girlfriend. She was 24, sweet enough, and had that slightly stunned expression of someone who had recently entered a reality she had not fully anticipated. They had been together for 8 months. They were living in a 1-bedroom downtown that he paid for with money our parents sent him each month. I found this out by accident when my mother casually mentioned adjusting their budget because of the transfer. I had been helping cover his expenses through my own softness for years, without ever knowing my parents were also writing him checks. The redundancy of it was almost impressive. By mid-autumn, there were signs. My brother started asking questions about my building. Was the parking covered? Did I have in-unit laundry? Were the walls thick? I answered because I had no reason not to. My mother started sending me links to organizational furniture, compact desks, fold-out tables. I filed this away as her general habit of sending unsolicited home content. I was wrong. The ambush came on a Sunday in early November. My mother had made a roast chicken with rosemary potatoes and a green bean casserole, which in retrospect should have told me everything. The good dishes were out. My father had made a point of being home and off his phone before I arrived, which was unusual. My brother and his girlfriend were both there, seated side by side on the love seat with the careful stillness of people who know what is about to happen and have agreed in advance not to speak until spoken to. I walked in and felt the air in the room, and even then, I told myself I was being paranoid. We ate dinner. The conversation was light and deliberate, the kind of dialogue that exists to fill space until the real conversation can begin. My mother asked about my job. My father asked if I had taken any trips recently. My brother's girlfriend complimented the potatoes. Everything was pleasant in the hollow, preparatory way of a waiting room. Then my mother folded her hands on the table and smiled at me. She said she and my father had been thinking. She said that my brother and his girlfriend were in a difficult spot. The rent on their downtown place had gone up significantly. His work was inconsistent, and they needed somewhere stable while they figured out their next chapter. She said the solution was obvious once you looked at it clearly. She said I had a second bedroom sitting mostly empty, and that it would mean so much to the family if I opened my home to them, just until they were back on their feet. 4 months, maybe 6. She said it the way someone announces a plan that has already been decided, framing my compliance as a foregone conclusion. I looked at my father. He was studying his plate. I looked at my brother. He was nodding slowly, the way people nod when they are trying to look appropriately humble about something they fully expect to receive. I put my fork down. I want to stop here for a moment, because I know what some people think when they hear these stories. They wonder why the person at the center of the situation didn't just say no. Simply, cleanly, immediately. I understand that reaction. I have had it myself, reading other people's stories from the outside. So I want to be honest about what actually happened next, because I think it matters. I said no. Not softly. Not apologetically. I said it directly and clearly. I told my mother that my second bedroom was my home office, that I used it every single day, that the idea of my brother and his girlfriend living in my condo was not something I was willing to consider, and that I was surprised she had proposed it without asking me first. I said all of this in one steady breath, the way I present to clients when I need something to land without being challenged. My mother blinked. Then she smiled again. The softer version she used when she was reclassifying my response as a knee-jerk reaction rather than a real position. She said she understood I was surprised, that change could feel overwhelming, that maybe I needed a few days to sit with it. My father said he thought it would actually be nice for me, that I spent too much time alone. My brother said he and his girlfriend were clean and quiet, and I would barely notice them. I told them again, no, not in a few days. Not after I sat with it. No. My mother's expression shifted then into something cooler and more familiar. She said I was being selfish. She said family was supposed to be there for each other during hard times. She said that I had the space and the stability, and that it was not a sacrifice to share a little of what I had with people who were struggling. My father said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. My brother's girlfriend looked at the tablecloth. I left shortly after that. I drove home with my hands too tight on the wheel, replaying the conversation and arriving at the same conclusion each time. I had said no, clearly, directly, without hedging. They had heard me and proceeded anyway. My no was not a boundary to them. It was an opening position in a negotiation I had not agreed to enter. My best friend is a woman named Dana. We have known each other since college, and she works in corporate compliance, which means she has a particular and finely tuned radar for the specific ways people try to bend rules to suit themselves. I called her that night, sitting on my kitchen floor with a glass of water I hadn't drunk yet, and I told her everything. She was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then she said, "Nora, let me ask you something. Did they hear you say no?" I said yes. She said, "And what changed?" "Nothing," I told her. "Nothing changed. They kept going." "Then you already have your answer," she said. "They don't need your permission. They need your compliance. Those are different things, and you can't use one to stop the other. You said no and it didn't matter, because they've decided your no doesn't count. So the question isn't how to say no better. The question is how to make it structurally impossible for them to move forward." I asked her what she meant. "You can't just refuse a request from people who don't recognize your right to refuse," she said. "You have to remove the thing they want from the equation, entirely." I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. The next morning, I woke up early, made coffee, and opened my laptop at the kitchen table. I did not check my phone, which already had 3 texts from my mother that I could see from the preview. I opened a spreadsheet instead, because when I need to think clearly, I think in data. I listed my assets, my current expenses, my mortgage balance, my savings. I looked at the rental market in my area. I looked at smaller apartments closer to my office. I looked at the numbers the way I look at a campaign budget, not as fixed constraints, but as variables to be reallocated. The picture that emerged was interesting. My condo, in the current market, would rent for significantly more per month than my mortgage payment. If I found a tenant, I could cover my mortgage entirely, rent a smaller 1-bedroom for less than the surplus, and end up spending less per month than I currently did, while also generating a small profit. More importantly, I would have a home that existed nowhere in my family's mental map, a place they had never seen, on a street they had never driven down, in a building they did not know the name of. I spent the rest of that week researching. I reached out to 2 property management contacts I had through work. I looked at lease templates. I pulled up listings for 1-bedrooms in a neighborhood on the west side of the city that I had always liked but never seriously considered. I did all of this quietly, during lunch breaks and evening hours, while my mother's texts arrived at regular intervals asking if I had thought more about it, reminding me that my brother and his girlfriend needed to know soon so they could plan, sending me photos of a compact desk she thought would fit nicely in my living room, so I would barely lose any space. I did not respond to any of it. On Thursday, Dana met me after work, and I walked her through what I was planning. She looked at the spreadsheet. She asked a few pointed questions about the lease terms and the management arrangement. Then she looked at me over her coffee cup and said, "You're not running away from this. You're taking the asset they want and reclassifying it before they can touch it." That was exactly right. By Friday, I had toured a 1-bedroom apartment on the west side that had a big window in the bedroom, hardwood floors throughout, and a kitchen that was smaller than my current one but felt cleaner somehow, fresher, like a room that had never been used as anyone's backup plan. I put in an application the same afternoon. The following Monday, I met with a property manager who had been recommended by a colleague. I explained that I was looking for a reliable long-term tenant, that I wanted a minimum 12-month lease, and that I needed the process handled with complete discretion. She told me she had a couple in mind, both teachers, no pets, excellent references, who had been searching in my zip code for 2 months and kept losing out in competitive situations. She said if I was willing to move quickly, she thought she could have a signed lease in my hands before the end of the week. I told her to move quickly. My application for the West Side apartment was approved on Tuesday. The property manager called on Thursday to say the teachers had signed and were thrilled. We set a move-in date for them that was 30 days out, which gave me exactly 4 weeks to relocate my life and hand over the keys. Throughout all of this, my family was in what I can only describe as a holding pattern. The texts from my mother continued, daily, then every other day, then slightly less frequent, in a way that felt deliberate. Dana recognized this immediately. She told me it was a pressure technique, that they were cycling between pursuit and withdrawal to create anxiety, hoping I would reach out to restore connection and signal my eventual surrender. I told her that understanding the technique was genuinely helpful. She said that was the point. The packing was the strangest part. I had moved into my condo 2 years earlier with a carefully assembled collection of things that were entirely mine. Furniture I had chosen, art I had picked out, kitchen equipment I had bought one item at a time with real consideration. Moving it out again felt like it should have been sad, and some moments it nearly was. But mostly it felt purposeful, like dismantling something before it could be taken apart for you. I rented a small storage unit on the east side and moved boxes in the evenings, a few at a time, so nothing looked dramatic from the outside. I sold what I didn't need through a local buy-nothing group and a few online listings. The bookshelf, the extra dining chairs, the exercise bike I had owned for 2 years and used approximately 11 times. People came to collect things with a gratitude that was almost embarrassing, and I felt lighter with every item that left. My mother called twice during the second week of packing. I let both calls go to voicemail. The first message was business as usual, a continuation of the plan, a mention that my brother was hoping to know by the weekend. The second was cooler in tone, the kind of message designed to communicate disappointment without stating it directly. She said she hoped I was doing okay because she hadn't heard from me. She said the family missed me. She did not ask a single question about how I was. I did not call back. Dana checked in every few days. She was a steady and unsentimental presence during that period, which was exactly what I needed. When I told her on a Wednesday night that I had just finished loading the last of the boxes and my condo was almost entirely empty, she said, "How do you feel?" I said I felt clear, like a table that had been cleared of everything that didn't belong there. She said that was a good sign. On the final day, I walked through my condo one last time. The rooms echoed a little with the absence of furniture. The afternoon light came through the living room windows the same way it always had, falling in long shapes across the floor. I stood in the second bedroom, the one that had been my office, the one my mother had already assigned to my brother in her mind, and I thought about the teachers who would be moving in the next day. A couple at the beginning of something, looking for somewhere stable and good. I locked up and handed the keys to the property manager. The following Sunday, I drove to my parents' house for the first time in nearly a month. I felt completely calm, in the specific way of someone who has already solved the equation and is simply waiting to present the answer. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed my brother's car was there, which I had expected. My mother would have made sure of it. I walked in without knocking, the way I always had. They were in the living room, all three of them, and my brother's girlfriend, in a scene that was clearly arranged to look casual and wasn't. My mother looked up with an expression that moved from surprise to something carefully composed as relief. My father lowered the volume on the television. My brother sat forward in his chair, with the posture of someone who had been waiting. My mother said, "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so glad you came. We've been worried." This was not true, and all four of us knew it, but I let it pass. We moved to the dinner table 20 minutes later. My mother had made a roast chicken again. I noticed this and found it almost funny. Apparently significant conversations in this family required a roast chicken. I filed that away. The meal was uncomfortable in a way that dinner table meals can only be when everyone is waiting for something. My mother talked about a neighbor's renovation. My father talked about a car issue he was having. My brother's girlfriend ate her food and said very little. My brother watched me with the barely concealed anticipation of someone who believes the thing he wants is about to be confirmed. My mother put down her fork midway through the main course and looked at me with the expression I had been expecting. Warm, immovable, certain. She said, "Nora, I know the last few weeks have been a lot to process, but your father and I have been talking, and we really feel that the most sensible path forward is for your brother and his girlfriend to move into your spare room while they stabilize. We know you have feelings about it, and we hear that. But sometimes, in a family, we do things that are inconvenient for us because we love each other. Your brother needs this, and you have the space." My father nodded. My brother looked at me steadily. I let the sentence settle. Then I said, "I hear you. And actually, I've been thinking about it too." My mother's shoulders visibly relaxed. The table shifted. My brother's girlfriend looked up from her plate for the first time in 10 minutes. I said, "The thing is, I don't have the space anymore." There was a brief silence that had a texture to it. My mother said, "What do you mean?" "I mean that my condo is no longer available." I said. I found tenants. They signed a 12-month lease. They moved in yesterday. The silence that followed this was different from the previous one. It was not the silence of surprise. It was the silence of an entire operating system, encountering a command it had no protocol to process. My mother's expression passed through several phases in rapid succession. Confusion, disbelief, the beginning of anger. She said, "I'm sorry, what did you say?" I said it again, clearly, at the same pace. I had tenants. They had signed a lease. The condo was rented. My brother pushed back from the table slightly. "You rented your condo," he said. It was not a question. It was him repeating a fact he was trying to make real. My mother said, "Without telling us?" I looked at her and kept my voice level. "It's my condo," I said. "I don't need to tell you what I do with it." "But we had a plan," she said. And the word plan came out with a weight that suggested she had already lived inside this plan, had already arranged the furniture of it in her mind. "Your brother and his girlfriend need a place. You have a room. We've been talking about this for weeks." "I know," I said. "And I told you no. 3 weeks ago, at this table, I told you no. You told me I was being selfish and that I would come around, so I made a different arrangement." My father put his fork down. He looked at me with something I had never quite seen from him before. Not anger. Something more tired than that. My brother said, "So, what are we supposed to do?" His voice had shifted into the register he used when he felt he was being denied something he was owed. "We can't afford to stay downtown. We've already told our landlord we're leaving." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, "and I meant it the way you mean something true that you are no longer responsible for." My mother said, "You did this on purpose." "I made a decision about my own property," I said. "I didn't do it to hurt anyone. I did it because I need my life to belong to me." That landed differently than I expected. I watched my mother's face and saw something move across it that I had not anticipated. Not just anger, something closer to grief, though I suspected the grief was less about me and more about the plan unraveling. My father said quietly, "Where are you living, Nora?" I told him I had a new apartment, that I was very happy with it, and that I would be sharing the address with people who had given me reason to trust it with them. He looked at the table. My brother said I was unbelievable. He said I had always had a problem being part of a family, that I acted like I was too good for everyone, that this was typical. He said it with real conviction, the way people say things they have been carrying for a while and are finally allowed to put down. His girlfriend put her hand on his arm. I picked up my purse from the back of my chair. My mother said, "So, that's it? You're just going to walk out?" "I'm going home," I said. "I have an early morning." She said my name once more as I walked toward the door. I turned around. She looked smaller than usual, or maybe I was just seeing her more accurately than I had before. She said, "I hope you know what you're throwing away." I thought about that for a second, genuinely. Then I said, "I think I'm starting to figure out what I'm keeping." I drove home with the radio on, something I rarely did. The west side of the city looked different at night. The streets quieter than the suburbs, the lights softer. I parked in my new building's lot, rode the elevator to the 3rd floor, and unlocked the door to an apartment that was entirely mine. The first week after that dinner was strange in its stillness. I had braced myself for an onslaught of calls and messages, for extended family to be recruited, for the kind of campaign my mother was historically very good at running. But there was almost nothing. A single text from my mother 2 days after, which said only that she hoped I was well. A voicemail from my father that I listened to 3 times because its tone confused me. He didn't ask me to reconsider. He just said he hoped my new place was treating me okay. I think the silence was shock more than strategy. I had done something so far outside my established character that their usual tools didn't fit. The soft version of me, the one who could be worn down over a long enough period, had apparently been replaced by someone who had quietly signed paperwork and moved while they were still composing their approach. About 3 weeks later, I ran into a cousin at a birthday dinner for a mutual friend. She pulled me aside near the end of the night with the slightly conspiratorial energy of someone who has information they are not entirely sure they should share, but are going to share anyway. She told me my brother and his girlfriend had moved back into my parents' house, into his old room, which apparently had not been kept as any kind of museum to his childhood, but had more recently been used as a sort of general storage space. The process of clearing it out had apparently been contentious. His girlfriend had a lot of strong opinions about the arrangement, specifically about how temporary it was going to be, and had made this clear in a way that my mother found grating. My brother treated the house the way he treated everything that belonged to other people, as an extension of his own convenience. My cousin said my mother had complained to an aunt that it was like having a tenant who paid nothing and appreciated nothing. She said my mother missed her quiet evenings. I thought about that. I thought about the irony of it for a moment, and then I let it go. Not because it wasn't satisfying, because it was, but because the satisfaction I was after had never really been about watching them struggle. It was about stopping struggling myself, and I had done that. The rest was just the natural physics of their situation, cause finding its effect without any help from me. Dana and I had dinner that Friday. We went to a new Thai place near my apartment, which she noted with approval was both delicious and very much on the west side, where no one's mother was likely to appear. She asked me how I felt, 3 weeks out. I said I felt like myself. More precisely, like a version of myself I had only previously met in brief intervals, during vacations or stretches between family events, a person who existed fully in her own life, without the constant low hum of what someone else needed from her. Dana raised her glass and said, "To removing the thing they wanted from the equation." I raised mine and said, "To drawing up new plans." That was 4 months ago. I have not spoken to my mother or my brother since the dinner. My father sent me a short email about 6 weeks in. It said that things at home were stressful, and that he thought about me sometimes and hoped I was okay. There was no acknowledgement of what had happened, no accounting for the years of quiet complicity in the way I had been treated. It was the kind of email that expects the recipient to read between the lines and feel responsible for what lives there. I read it twice, then I closed it and went back to the report I had been working on. I'm not going to tell you that walking away from your family is easy, or that it doesn't leave a mark. I carried a complicated grief about it for weeks, not for the people they had been to me, but for the people I had spent a long time hoping they might become. There is a version of this story where a family, confronted with what they had been doing, recognizes it and changes. That version does not feature in my life. But the version I have, the one with the apartment on the 3rd floor and the balcony where I drink my coffee in the mornings, is better than I knew how to want when I was still inside the old one. The condo is rented. The teachers send their monthly payment on the 1st, like clockwork. The property manager says they love it there. My spare bedroom is now a proper home office. My desk is in front of the window, and in the mornings, the light comes in from the east and lands on the wall in a long, clean shape. Nobody has ever suggested it would make a nice room for someone else. Nobody knows where I live who would think to suggest it. Last month, I booked a solo trip to Portugal for the spring. I have wanted to go for years and never quite let myself. I booked the flights on a Tuesday evening with the same deliberateness I have applied to every decision in the past several months. I have a list of things I want to see, and a longer list of things I want to eat, and no particular schedule to answer to. I think about the moment at the dinner table sometimes, not with the electric satisfaction of a victory, though it was something like that. More with the quiet recognition of a turning point. The moment I stopped being a resource in someone else's plan and became the person drawing up my own. My mother said I would know what I was throwing away. As it turns out, I knew exactly what I was keeping.